And welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, December 8th, 2023. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-hosts David Brill and Josh Klayman. Before we begin, our usual disclaimers. Obviously, please keep in mind that nothing discussed is accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. And obviously, everything that David and Josh and I are discussing are our own personal perspectives and don't necessarily reflect the perspectives of our respective organizations. One other thing to put out there, shout out to this week's sponsors, Global Legal Insights, the one and only James Strode as well. They publish every year the blockchain and cryptocurrency regulation guide. Josh and you and I and David and so many other colleagues in the WSBA and beyond in the fields of law and regulation contribute. I think it's something like global regulations and perspectives across more than 30 different jurisdictions. It really is a definitive guide. Check them out. globallegalinsights.com will also include the link in the show notes as well. So with that, I just want to say hello to David and Josh. Good to see you both.
You too, Ron. I'm coming to you from LaGuardia Airport, and I'm very excited to be headed down to Florida for the weekend and to go see the art show down in Florida.
I think you're going to be missing an incoming storm in the Northeast, so well done escaping just in time, David. Josh, how are you?
Well, as you can see, not the greatest. Although some might say, "Hey, that's how you normally look on these things."
Oh,
but yeah. So apologies in advance for any coughing. And I'm so sorry. Like, just to segue from that, I'm so sorry to have missed last night's holiday party for the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. But I understand you guys were both there and that it was fantastic.
We had a great time. Shout out to our friends at Jenner and Block for hosting us. The one and only Kayvon Sadeghi, who had to deal with me and all of the team and party arrangements as well. David, it was a small group, but it was a great time. What did you think?
No, I thought it was great, and there were some really interesting conversations had, and there's some themes that we'll talk about on this podcast today that we were discussing last night.
Perfect. David, I wanted to start with you if I could. And obviously, we all share the proposed agenda and the bullet points we're going to talk about, and it changes every single time. I wanted to start with some of the market dynamics, David, and I'm still digesting some of the data as well, but I'd love your macro perspectives. So this morning, the jobs number came out in the U.S., and if I read the tea leaves correctly, the consensus was that labor is stronger than people thought, and that interest rates will probably stay high for a prolonged period of time. You and I have had many conversations on the macroeconomic forces impacting crypto. Do you think interest rates being high for a prolonged period of time is a net negative for crypto? How does that reflect in what you're seeing in the market?
Sure. So for starters, I think that the month-by-month job reports, the actual numbers themselves are not great data. They ended up getting restated massively,
Yep.
Sometimes up, sometimes down. I think, though, you hit on it, that the idea that interest rates aren't going to be cut for a while is a net negative for the market. Look, this market definitely benefits from cheaper liquidity and lower interest rates. So higher interest rates for longer is not helpful. That being said, I still think there's some major catalysts, one being the ETF that I think is coming shortly. That will be, a big catalyst for the market. And, we'll talk about it more, but there's a lot of liquidity coming into the market. And I think that's really beneficial. But the quick answer to your question is lower interest rates are better. So I think that's a net negative, but I just think there's a lot of bullish things going on in the space that continue to make it a positive.
David, do you think, and Josh, I'd love you to come into this conversation. I know you don't look at markets directly, but certainly the conversations you have with clients, when we look at the prices, broke 44,000 on BTC earlier this week, David. I think I saw Solana or some other tokens. Solana, I believe, up over 600% this year. Are we overbought? Is it a little too much too fast?
I would argue that we were oversold.
Okay.
Yes, on a percentage basis, these numbers look a little eye-popping. But I think you have to have some perspective. Now, with Solana, there was a lot of selling related to FTX and the relationship between Solana and FTX. So I would argue that it probably should never have gotten down to $8 or $9 a token. So yes, it's eye-popping now. It's around 72, 73. But, when something sells out that heavy, the multiplier effect looks bigger.
Right.
The other thing I would say is, there's a lot of activity on the Solana blockchain. There's a lot of activity on Chainlink, on some of these other Avalanche. And so you're seeing activity, you're seeing progress, and you're seeing some, price recovery.
Yeah.
But and I don't have all the charts in front of me, but Solana was in the mid twos at some point,
Right.
$200 a token, and now it's back to 70. So that's we'll just say, argument's sake, it's a third of where it was. And over the time period, it's really grown and it's more activity and it's developed more. So I think we have to have a little more nuanced look and not just look at the price, but look at where it's been. May it have been oversold, and look at all the development that's going on.
Right. Josh, as part of this kind of markets conversation, I love your perspective always when we discuss this. And you're busy generally all the time, but are you seeing kind of an upswing in business, or are you seeing more and more clients coming to you and others, just given the market dynamics of prices going up and more people diving into this marketplace?
So I would say, without saying anything too specific, definitely things are busier, right? They were already busy, but definitely busier. I think, as David noted, there was a lot of overhang, not just for Solana, but for others as well, relating to FTX and Binance and all kinds of things where we were waiting for answers, or some kind of resolutions. Now, one could say we're still waiting for certain answers and certain resolutions.
Right.
But at the same time, I think that I really think there's a lot of thawing going on, notwithstanding that we actually are in true, like, at least in the Northeast, we're in winter. I think there are lots of signs that, just more broadly, people are moving out of the mindset that they had perhaps for the latter half of 2022 and certainly in the beginning of 2023. I think we're moving in a great direction. Now, you can say also, and I would just say for one moment about price, and obviously no one wants to take my investment advice, and so I won't give it ever.
Or ours, to be clear.
Yeah. Is just and I think this goes to David's point as well. Just like when you ask something to like track the price over a period of time, over the course of a day, it might look like a straight line up or it might look flat, right? But if you pull it out to like a week, a month,
Yep.
6 months, a year,
Yeah.
5 years, like it, even though there is a lot of price movement lately, I think to David's point, things have been higher. Things have been certainly lower, but I don't know. I'm just seeing positive signs. Now, that being said, of course, we do have statements in the market from some big players, which I'm sure we'll get into, as well as some new bills being introduced.
Indeed. Josh, thanks so much. And for the audience watching us on LinkedIn Live and on X, thank you so much. If you've got questions for David or Josh or myself, put them in the chat. We'll certainly do everything we can to respond to them. Josh, on that point, one of the other things we often look at, David and I will talk about market dynamics and macroeconomic trends and the importance of crypto in that context. Certainly, some of that action is informed by the other side of the coin that we always look at, which is, as you noted, Josh, regulation and legislation and kind of regulatory acts. I want to point out something. I kind of was blown away by this. David, Josh, I'm sure you saw the article. Federal judge recently potentially was going to warn the SEC that some of their attorneys might be sanctioned because they had made false arguments against a crypto company to try to engage a temporary restraining order. I was pretty blown away by that. David, is that a mistake? Is that par for the course? Why would that happen in this kind of context?
Well, we're treading on thin ice here, Ron. But
yes.
I will say this: I'm not involved in that case, but I did read what the judge had to say, and I would just say, based on what I read, it was disappointing to see. There's a fine line when you're prosecuting what you perceive to be as a fraud versus prosecuting things that you may feel that violate, different regulations. And look, I understand zealous, doing your job zealously and prosecuting things as you deem appropriate. But, as lawyers, we all have responsibilities, before the court. and in our practices. And so I was just disappointed to see that happened.
Josh, what are your thoughts on that as well? You and I have had a lot of conversations about, and again, the three of us know this. It always sounds like we're bashing on the SEC and others. That's not the intention, but it's really worth the conversation. Were you surprised by that news?
So I was surprised by the news and the reporting of it. Certainly I don't know all the details, as I'm not involved in the case. What I would say is just, if what's being alleged is true, that's clearly not good. I generally think, though, I tend to think that even though people may have, and generally speaking, this may be a different case. I don't actually, I'm not close enough to the facts on it. But I just think that although, regulators and the market participants may have different views on a lot of things, I think we have to remember in general that, in my view, the regulators, the people at the regulators, the staff, they, I believe, are doing what they believe is right and best, and trying to be good civil servants, right? And so, yes, if it is the case that somebody like willfully, allege things that they didn't have a factual basis for, that's one thing. But without knowing more, I wouldn't jump to conclusions. It may be that there was erroneous information.
Sure, people make mistakes. Also, considering. Josh, thanks so much for that. David, Josh, I just want to throw one last comment about that out there. And again, we don't have a litigator on the call, and I'm certainly not an attorney. But when we talk about a judge potentially sanctioning an attorney in a case, particularly a regulator's attorneys, what sanctions might they be? What might that look like? Do either of you know?
Look, a lawyer could be fined. Usually, if it was a law firm, the law firm could be fined. You see this in a lot of discovery cases where if the court doesn't feel that the law firm has acted appropriately, or the company has obfuscated documents, or is not working within what the judge's orders are, you may see that sometimes. Not sure what would happen if an SEC lawyer was sanctioned for misdeed, so to speak, but I'm sure the judge will decide what he thinks is appropriate as a penalty if that's the case.
Right. David, thanks. So one more shout out to our friends, the sponsors of today's episode, just real quickly again, the one and only James Strode and our friends at Global Legal Group. Take a look. It's got David's thought leadership, Josh's thought leadership, so much thought leadership from members of the WSBA and beyond. GlobalLegalInsights.com, and we'll include them in the show notes as well. David, you referenced something earlier, and I want to pull us into the conversation. I think it's important. The ticking clocks of multiple crypto ETFs in this space. I keep asking you to make predictions, and you're smarter than I. You don't make those predictions. But what are your thoughts on the current notes and the way the market's moving? And you cited an article this morning. Sorry, you cited something on X this morning that I thought was interesting. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So, you keep hearing about dialogue that the commission's having with different issuers. A couple of the issuers, updated their S1s with a ticker symbol. One is, I think, HODL. I don't recall what the other one is off the top. Look, I do think that at this point it's really starting to feel like it's inevitable. But if you force me, to pick a time, I'm starting to feel like first quarter of next year we could see an approval.
Right.
Maybe I'm just really in the holiday spirit and I'm just feeling, charitable, but everything I'm reading and sort of feeling leads that way. And then the other thing is the price action, especially in Bitcoin, really looks like a lot of people are trying to get in before the ETF gets approved.
David, can we stay on that really quickly one moment? Because the other metric that you and I often look at is our quote unquote whale accounts and kind of big movements. Yeah. Have you seen any shift there as well?
I mean, we are seeing some whale buying, but I think I'm looking at specific numbers, and around 48,000 is what I think it was the high in Bitcoin, like post FTX. So I'm really trying to look at around this 44, 48 range and see like where we end up. My feeling is is that we may have one sell-off to come because we've moved up so far so fast. But I think people may be afraid to short the market because, you don't know when an ETF could be approved.
Right.
And so, like, boy, it'd be tough to be short the market. And the next day you go on X or, log in and ETF approved, and that short position is really underwater.
You don't want to be on the short side if that happens.
No, but I will say this. There's a lot of weird things that happen around the holidays when there's less people focused. And so I wouldn't think that an ETF would be approved between Christmas and New Year's. So Christmas and New Year's could get a little volatile, and
Yeah.
we may see a sell-off around that time just because people, aren't as tied to their desks and maybe some less liquidity.
I've got a bet with one of the team here that on Christmas Eve, we'll probably get a drop, or the day before Christmas Eve, whatever it is, we'll get a drop of some regulator proposed rules that's going to blow up our calendar, David. Josh, I wanted to pull you into that as well. Certainly the conversations around ETFs and some of the other stuff that we're all watching. Again, not part of the day-to-day, but how is it impacting the world you're operating in? And do you see any, or do you foresee any regulatory actions coming up in the coming weeks or months that might be negative for the ecosystem?
So, I mean, definitely, I think people are seeing the potential for the Bitcoin spot ETFs as a big bright spot. So I do think that is something that people are excited about. I think people are expecting that will have more of an impact than perhaps the ETH futures ETF that had been previously approved, right? For the reasons that we've discussed on here in the past. I do think that I don't know. I can't say with the timing. It seems reasonable that we might see something drop at times that perhaps are unexpected, or now that we're talking about it, are expected. But what I do think is, well, we have a number, obviously, of market structure cases out there right now from the SEC.
Yep.
I really think that a strong focus going forward, and we heard this from Janet Yellen and others in connection with the press release. I mean, not the press release, the press conference with Binance and the guilty pleas and settlements with the DOJ, FinCEN, Treasury, and CFTC. Right, this focus on national security, and this is something I've been saying a lot, as has Dina Ellis Rochkind, as well as numerous others. But these are Dina's name certainly comes to mind.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing this also in the legislature. We saw, for example, this introduction by a bipartisan group of senators to introduce legislation that would target terror financing from digital assets and empowering OFAC and Treasury. It's called the Terrorist Financing Prevention Act of 2023. And while a lot of bills may not have necessarily made their way all the way through to become law, I do think that the potential is there, especially as we see with AI and other kinds of technologies, this focus on weaponization potentially, and also national security, that maybe the national security related bills could make their way through, and maybe that's something that during an election year candidates may be focused on.
Josh, that's a really good point. And again, thank you so much. Shout out to Dina Ellis, along with Adam Goldberg, both WSBA members. Shameless plug. We monthly do a policy update with both of them about everything going on in DC from a regulatory legislative perspective. So a good point, Josh, and we'll probably be discussing that for some time to come, including the fact that crypto friendlies are now leaving Congress in greater and greater numbers. There's something to unpack, though, that you said earlier, and I want to put this forward as well, and David, pull you into this. We've talked about CZ in conversations within WSBA. A judge has said he can't leave. He's a flight risk, particularly being located in UAE. I had read recently, I think it was this morning or yesterday, a Do Kwon being repatriated from Montenegro to the U.S. I'm going to ask what might be a sensitive question or not, but we've often talked about the bad actors. David, are we looking at the last of the bad actors with SBF and CZ and Do Kwon being pulled off the chessboard in a way? What are your thoughts about that?
So, I'm going to say for starters that I don't personally think CZ is a bad actor. I think that the Binance, I don't want to talk about it in detail, but I think they
Sure.
took aggressive positions, and those aggressive positions led to the order and the agreement they made with the government. But I do think CZ and Binance have made a lot of positive contributions to the ecosystem. So I would definitely put him aside from the other two in my mind. That being said, I think that the industry and the market is mature. And so I think the ability to have these kind of widespread frauds has diminished. Now, it
Mm,
doesn't mean on a smaller level, you won't see a rug pull, or you won't see people's, wallets being hacked or dusted or things like that. But I don't think the mechanisms are in place to tolerate such a large fraud. And so, you could argue that Luna was like just the algorithmic stablecoin. The algorithm didn't work,
mm.
and subsequently the fallout from that. But regardless, I think that on a large scale, I think the market has evolved. And some of the practices that intermediaries were doing are just not things that are going to be accepted in the market going forward.
David, thanks. Josh, I just got to say, what a trooper. I know you're a bit under the weather. We missed you at the holiday party last night, but boy, do you still keep plugging along.
Thanks.
And
When you see my head ducking down, it's to to avoid
no, it's
the
it's
camera.
it's great to have you a part of it. I just want to pull you. I want to hit on one point. Earlier this week, hell froze over. I was watching some news and hearings, and certainly the banking hearings, and Congress regularly calls the CEOs of major banks for a thrashing, generally, or support, depending on what side of the aisle you're on. And something happened that I never thought would have happened. Elizabeth Warren basically was almost kumbayaing with Jamie Dimon and their perspectives on crypto. I'm going to be personal here, make a personal note. I thought it was a bit ridiculous. I do respect Diamond and the others, but some of the perspectives on crypto were silly in my opinion. David, Josh, am I wrong? I always pull David into these kind of political Capitol Hill conversations. David, go ahead, buddy.
Um, well, look, first of all, these are all our own personal opinions, not of our
Correct.
companies or firms. So I want to say that first. I would just say that, from a JP Morgan perspective, if you're talking your book and,
Mm-hmm.
crypto is competitive to what your legacy businesses are, from his perspective, why would I support something that is, really competitive to, a business that I have that's super profitable?
Yeah. Yeah.
Regardless of the fact that, they certainly are involved in blockchain projects and investments and things of that nature. So, look, as we've seen with the college presidents testifying, before Congress this past week, anything goes and commentary on what people say in these hearings. So I just take it that way.
David, good point. And Josh, certainly want your input. And one thing I'll just add to David, what you were saying, JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon, Jamie Dimon in particular being very critical of crypto and that it should be basically wiped out is not hypocritical given some of the work that they're doing with blockchain and distributed ledger. Would both of you agree with that? Yeah, Josh, you want to weigh in?
So I want to weigh in carefully. I think we probably should bear in mind that Jamie Dimon may be giving his own personal views and not
Sure.
necessarily those of his employer.
Yep.
And I think to me, I can see how it would make sense. Just bear with me for a second. In the thread of national security, following that thread, continuing with that lens, so to speak, right? And so I think if viewed in that way, I can see how there may have been synergies between between various folks because, of course, banks are used to things like KYC, AML,
Sure.
sanctions, and the like. And I think that, as I mentioned, I think it's going to be a big push for the crypto industry and by legislators in general, really across technologies, as we've kind of talked about in the past, whether it's AI, whether it's infrastructure as a service. I think there's going to be a big focus on it. But
Josh,
I mean, clearly, I have a positive view of the digital asset space. So
yes, and Josh, to that point, and again, I'm going to mention Adam Goldberg, Dina Ellis, and a lot of our other WSBA members who raised the national security issue. And to be clear, we all recognize that's an important issue, and really addressing that might be one of the ways some of this stuff moves through what is arguably a divided Congress. David, before the jet takes you to the Florida compound and you wade into your Olympic-sized infinity pool, what will you be looking at in the coming days and weeks? We're coming into the holiday season. Things are slowing down a little bit. I half joke about regulators dropping something before the holidays. But what's the rest of the year looking like, in your opinion?
Well, I do want to say one quick thing, is that I believe the narrative about crypto and tariff financing is overblown. I think that because of all the analytic tools that are in place, I think a lot of people who might consider financing terrorism could be unmasked using wallets and transferring value to these organizations in a way that doesn't happen when you use cash and put it in a suitcase and sort of hand it to one person to another. So I don't think that element has been fully appreciated, or it's being ignored. So I want to just put that out there, that I think that on a percentage basis, it is very little. And I think there are much bigger pools to be focused on than crypto. So I just want to put that out there.
So may
go
I
ahead,
just jump
Josh.
in for a second? I agree with David about the the relative percentages, at least from what I've heard and seen. I guess what I was just trying to say is I think that's a government focus.
No, and agreed.
Yeah, no, Josh, I understand. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm disagreeing with the focus and how. So for me, I really think that there's a lot of liquidity flowing in, and I think you see it in buckets. One is, I think there's a prevailing view that an ETF for Bitcoin will be approved. I think multiple ones. Yeah. And I think people are trying to get exposure before it goes live, when it goes live. And you get exposure by buying, Bitcoin on a crypto exchange, or, Grayscale as their product, which kind of mirrors, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some other tokens. I mentioned the product only because I think that product is also a tell to see what kind of liquidity is going into certain tokens. And so when those specific token trusts are trading above or premium to their price, it's a tell that people want to be getting exposure to these tokens, and for whatever reason, they can't buy them on a crypto exchange. And so my long-winded way of getting to this is that I think we're kind of seeing an altcoin bloom. And I think that we've seen the majority of the increases in Bitcoin. Like, I could see it maybe going up to 48, but not really much more than that. And we may see some cooling off a little bit. But I think we're seeing a rotation into the major altcoins, and a couple of altcoins in themes. So,
are either of you concerned about buy the rumor, sell the fact once the ETFs come out? David, I know you and I have chatted about this, and you've got a distinct opinion that I think makes sense. But are either of you worried about that?
You have any thoughts, Josh? I have a view. So,
I mean, what I might say is it's certainly possible that at various points some parties decide, you know what, I'm finally in the black, I'm going to take some.
Let me take it off the table, right?
Yeah. So it's possible, but I think in general this is a huge move forward. And once we have the first Bitcoin spot ETF approved in the US, we're on to the next. We're on to bigger and better things. And like we always say, builders keep building.
Right. And, to that point, Josh, a spot Ethereum ETF was applied. Application was submitted not too long ago. David, forgive me, I forget the firm. but not an insubstantial firm, as I recall, put forward a spot Ether
Yeah.
ETF. So we're really beginning to see the evolution of the market. We're running a bit out of time. Josh, I just wanted to get your perspective from the vineyard in New Jersey over the weekend. What will you be doing? What will you be focusing on?
So I feel, other than work, I've given up predicting what the news will bring. So I will just be perusing the publications online. But I also just want to well, first I want to also make a clarification.
Yes.
I am 100% a fan of the GLG treatises or books, however we want to describe them, and have in the past contributed articles, but I don't want to leave people with the erroneous impression that I did this year. Although many, many, many of our esteemed colleagues in the WSBA did. And also on that thread, I just want to say, we don't talk about every kind of lawyer ranking that comes out.
Mm.
But wow, what an amazing showing for the lawyers in the WSBA with the recent chambers announcements. There's too many to name, but very proud of everybody. And of course, there are many amazing lawyers in the WSBA who may not have even applied to that list, right?
Yep.
But I just wanted to recognize all the minds that are part of the team.
We're privileged to have real thought leaders across multiple industry verticals. Certainly law is one of them. Josh will be sending a public shout out to all of them. David, Josh, before we wrap up for the day, again, thank you both. You guys are troopers, always, wherever you're flying or however you feel, you always show up. So it's great to see you both. Any last comments before we leave off before the weekends?
I'm going to spend this weekend really thinking about staking and looking at different protocols and seeing how easy is it to stake, and and especially for non-ERC20 tokens. So I think I'm gonna spend Sunday, since my Jets are awful, and have some football on in the background, and do a little dive into this and see what I can find, because I do think that people are starting to get interested in some of the other ecosystems and staking. And I'm gonna really just dive in and see, like, on a difficulty scale, like where I think the difficulty is. And I bring it up because it's really interesting. It's like, if I think about other protocols, like, I'm not even sure which are the best wallets for staking Avalanche or staking Chainlink, which is coming live in a couple of days, or staking Solana, just to name a few.
Yeah.
So I'm really gonna try and sort of take a free form look at that, because I think that's, other people are interested in these things. So I like to test them out myself. So I'm gonna have a lot of football on, have a barbecue going, and see what I can find.
Nice. David, let's chat about that next week as well. You and I had this conversation briefly at yesterday's event. It really is also a UX conversation. I'd be interested to see your perspectives on that come next week. I'm going to spend the balance of my weekend planning the rest of the year. We're down to our last 3 working group meetings of the year. Josh, Monday's legal working group meeting will be the last of the year. Lots to talk about as well. But we're going to leave it there. Thank you for everyone in the audience on LinkedIn and X who joined us. If you've got questions for David or Josh or myself and we didn't get to them, email us, info@wsba.co. But we will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining. David, Josh, as always, thank you for being a part.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ron. Everybody have a good weekend.
You too.